Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about today, this is been making the rounds on the internet, and I've seen some people kind of up in arms about it. IGN did an interview with Daisuke, who is the creator of Guilty Gear. There was a particular line from this interview that some people were not too fond of. So without going through the whole interview, which I'll have the whole interview in the description below if you want to read it yourself. So the line that got everyone's attention is IGN saying, they asked Daisuke, is there anything that you think you would like to have done differently or anything on that side of it, referring to Guilty Gear Strive specifically. And Daisuke said, so how do I put it? Amongst different, I guess you would say, competitive games, fighting games in particular have a high bar of entry. It's really hard for a new player to join in on that. So if there's something that I wish I could do better next time, it's to make that a lot easier. Make it easier and simpler for people to be able to just join in the game and really start to enjoy fighting games. Just got everybody going, because the topic of fighting games becoming easier and simpler and everything has been something that's been around since I got into fighting games like 6 or 7 years ago. And for those of you that maybe weren't around during the time when Guilty Gear Strive was releasing, there was a lot of controversy in regards to this game, specifically in how much they were changing compared to the previous games. Guilty Gear was a game that had a lot of legacy behind it, and a lot of people thought Guilty Gear was very difficult, right? That's what always got said all the time, that Guilty Gear is a very difficult, very hard game to get into. And it always kind of carried that energy behind it. When Strive came out, that was something that they really tried to change. They really wanted to make Strive specifically much easier to get into and easier to play. And it's not just Strive, this has been a common trend in fighting games forever, especially this kind of generation of fighting games. We're starting to move on to the next generation of fighting games with like Street Fighter 6 and Tekken 8 and stuff. But the previous generation, games from like Street Fighter 5 and onwards, really focused on the simplification of fighting games. Now, the reason I want to talk about this is because I think the topic is actually really nuanced. A lot of people kind of miss some of the things that I think are important. So the first thing that I think is important to this topic is that I think it makes total sense that they want fighting games to be more approachable, right? Just as a company, you want more people to get into your fighting game and you want more people to be able to play it. And fighting games obviously are difficult games. Fighting games are not actually harder than other genres, but what I will say about them is I think they're less intuitive. And I think that's the part of fighting games that honestly doesn't get as much attention from developers. The process of making a game easier or simpler, I think, is technically fine and it makes sense, and it's honestly a good idea. Making the skill floor of a game easier to get into, I think, is objectively good for the most part. The problem where I think things start coming up is that developers often make changes to the game that make it simpler or easier that do one of two things, if not both. Either one, they do something that significantly changes the game and alienates their current player base that they have. That is something that very much happened with Guilty Gear Strive compared to something like Exit or Plus R. Or they run into a situation where they make the game simpler or easier to play in a way that significantly impacts higher level of play and not just lower level of play. This is also something that I think affected Guilty Gear Strive pretty majorly. Something you'll see with Strive has a lot of simple situations, very linear types of situations. I use that word a lot when I'm describing situations in fighting games, where you just kind of have like two options to pick from. It's like, do you mash or do you not? Do you jump, do you not? Do you DP or do you know? That type of thing. And those situations are compounded by the fact that damage in Strive is very high. While I think the idea is good and well-intended, I think a lot of the times the execution of how developers go about actually making games simpler is often misguided because they kind of miss the point in the first place. I think if you're trying to make a fighting game easier to play, the goal should be making it easier to understand what it is that you need to do in the game. Because again, I don't think fighting games are super intuitive for most people, especially compared to other popular genres like shooters, for example, which I also play a lot. Fighting games do a really bad job of teaching people how to actually play the game, and it does a really bad job of showing people the difference between what separates like a newer player and someone who actually plays fighting games, because there is a very big significant difference there. They don't put features in the game that help people to kind of ease them into the game. And what I mean by that is that fighting games are very bad about having good tutorials. Fighting games are very bad about having good single-player content. Having single-player content in a fighting game that could help teach you the proper concepts of playing a fighting game, things like whiff punishing, things like hit confirming, that type of thing. If you had that in like a fun single-player, right? Not just a tutorial mode, because the tutorial mode isn't going to help people because no one wants to play a tutorial mode, right? It's just not fun. It's boring. You don't want to feel like you're being taught. If you had a fun single player that felt enjoyable to play, that also kind of secretly taught people how to play the game, I think that'd be very beneficial. And then the other side of it that fighting games always mess up is the online functionality of the game. Actually making sure people can play other people of similar skill is very important, I think. And it's something that almost every fighting game misses out on majorly. I think Strive also messed up on this, right? Strive has amazing netcode, but I think the lobby system that they have with the floors and Celestial and all of that, it just isn't good, right? I think that it's too in your face. It makes people think about it too much. It's putting too much agency in the player's hands, which is usually a good thing. You know, giving people control is usually good. But I think you need to be able to have your fighting game for a new player to be able to just hit the button to play the game and play other people roughly close to their solo. So I think the idea of trying to get people into the fighting games and making them easier is good, but it's oftentimes so misguided that they miss out on the things that are actually important. The thing about this article, right? People are talking about how like, oh, Dice wanted to make Strive easier. They already made the game super duper easy, right? That's been the discourse since Strive came out, that like this game is too easy, it's too simple, it's for babies, blah 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 blah. The part that feels like a miss to me in regards to what he said is that they released a game that didn't have much content in it. They released a game with tutorials that don't help players. They released a game with an online system that doesn't help people play other people of equal skill levels. Maybe that's what he meant in all of this, but it's not clear what he actually meant by all of it. And the fact that he doesn't mention those parts of the game to me is like more of a problem. Because, I mean, right now, obviously, like, Guilty Gear Strive servers don't even work. So not even mentioning stuff like that is, like, a big miss as well. Ultimately, I think fighting games as a genre are very difficult. And I think even the easiest fighting games, like, I would say Guilty Gear Strive is a easy fighting game. At the end of the day, it's still a game that is too hard for a lot of people. I see a lot of people struggle to do combos in Strive, right? Like, a lot of newer players, people who've been playing for even a year now, still struggle to actually, like, really play the video game. And I think that stems from the fact that the genre itself is just difficult and it's not intuitive for people. And that's what needs to be addressed. You're not going to be able to simplify the game any further than that without making the game have severe diminishing returns for the actual gameplay once you get good at it. On the flip side, I think people that complain about certain fighting games being too easy are also kind of missing the mark because, like I just said, fighting games inherently are difficult, even the easy ones. Getting to top level in Guilty Gear Strive is not easy, and very, very few people have done it, right? It's always weird to me when I see people who are not like, you know, strong tournament players, like they don't place in tournaments consistently, complaining about how easy a game is. Because it's like, you're not even at the top level anyways, so how are you saying it's too easy if you're not good at it? Or often it's like people that don't even like make Celestial and Strive are like, yeah, it seems too easy. It's like, well, okay, you're not good at it, so what's that say about you? I think there are some parts of fighting game gameplay that making them easier or simpler is fine and good. I think execution is something that is fine to actually make easier in a lot of ways. So for example, one instance of making something easier in a fighting game is actually Street Fighter 4 to Street Fighter 5. In Street Fighter 4, there was no input buffer, so doing links in that game, especially one-frame links, were truly one-frame links. You just had to do a one-frame link for a lot of combos in that game. In Street Fighter 5, they added a buffer to the game, which now a one-frame link will be a three-frame link because there's an input buffer. I think things like that are fine. I think those make sense to do. So here's the thing. When it comes to execution, I think the thing that's important is not necessarily for things to be physically hard. I think what should be important is like when it comes to combos and block strings, giving people options is what is important. If you are simplifying what tools people have access to, if you are reducing the amount of things someone can do in a fighting game, you're removing the ability to have, you know, self-expression as people call it. You're removing the ability to research things. You're removing the ability to like find new tech all the time. That's bad. You can have things easy to input but have a lot of depth to them. The depth, I think, is mostly what matters. So something like a parry is not technically hard to do, or it doesn't have to be. You can do things that are interesting and fun and make them easier to physically perform, but still have a lot of strategy and depth to them, you know? That's what I'm getting at. Taking away options and making the game more dull is not the answer to simplification. Making things easier to do, making things easier to understand, helping players learn what the things are that they need to be doing, that's proper simplification. That's productive, and you're lowering the skill floor, you're making the barrier to entry easier, but you're not lowering the skill ceiling, you're not lowering what you can ultimately do in a game. But yeah, basically just to bring it all back in and like summarize the conversation, I think making fighting games simpler and easier is not inherently bad. I think it's just often misguided the way they try to go about it. There are many ways to simplify a fighting game that don't make it worse for the general player base or the high level players. that don't have to remove depth from the game or fun from the game to make it easier to play and understand for players. I think oftentimes the way that fighting games need to be improving is from functionality of online stuff to how matchmaking works, to helping players use training mode better, helping players actually learn what a fighting game is supposed to look like, teaching players hit confirming, stuff like that, I think is important. I think oftentimes, while it's fair that people obviously don't want fighting games to get simpler or easier because it just makes them less fun, I think that people need to remember that fighting games just inherently are difficult, and for a lot of us, we've been playing them for many years and we don't realize it. You can say Strive's an easy game all you want. I have seen so many people struggle with the game to get better. And quite frankly, you can say a fighting game's easy, but there's still only going to be, you know, a very, very small percentage of players who are actually top level at that fighting game. I think it's quite a nuanced topic, and there's probably a lot more that I could talk about in this regard. And I'm sure we'll talk about it in the future because this topic tends to come up every couple of months.